This is Boomer Life on CL 650.
This is Boomer Life on CL 650. I'm Joanne Sutton with Maria Howard in the studio, CEO of the Alzheimer's Society of BC. We also have Dorothy LeClaire with us today, a First Link coordinator with the Society, and Roger and Pat Howard, who have shared their story of their very personal and family journey with the disease. And now we also welcome Dr. Robin Shung. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
So Dr. Robin Shung joins us by telephone. He is an associate professor in neurology at the University of British Columbia. He has extensive experience in behavioral neurology and also neurodegenerative diseases. He's conducted many large-scale, multi-center clinical trials, as well as many studies in the genetic and the clinical epidemiology of dementia. So Dr. Shung, I think it's just great that when we can have researchers join us in this conversation. Can you just tell us a little bit about the different types of research around Alzheimer's disease and some other dementias that you're involved with right now?
Sure. So we are involved in a very wide range of research, starting from the molecular level, looking at the genetic mechanisms of diseases, to clinical trials testing potential new therapy in our patients, to the population level, looking at healthcare delivery in BC and also ethical concerns in patients with dementia.
So how do you actually conduct these clinical trials? Are these interviews with those diagnosed? Are they scientific?
Yes, so the clinical trials is a particular method in comparing patients who are treated with one form of therapy with another. For Alzheimer's, current therapy are not very successful. I mean, in terms of stopping the progression. So the new therapy that are being tested are tried on patients in one arm, and in another arm, they will receive a placebo, which is kind of a dummy medication with no therapeutic benefits. So we will compare them because dementia and cognitive behavior is highly suggestive. So if we do not blind ourselves and the patients, sometimes people just think that they're receiving something, will already feel better. So in a clinical trial, the people will be blinded and we'll follow them with the treatment and then look at the outcome at the end to decide whether something is actually working or not.
And what are you hoping to actually learn from these clinical trials, whether these people respond to the medication, or obviously you're trying to find a cure or something that will slow down the disease, but what are you hoping?
Right. So, of course, the ultimate goal is to have a treatment that can actually stop the disease or reverse the process. If we cannot reverse the process, at least if we can stop the disease or slow down the progression, that will be a success.
So usually once a week or quite frequently in the news and in the media or on social media, we'll see a report that comes through saying, oh, there's been a breakthrough with Alzheimer's disease. I'm just wondering, as a member of the general public, I'm not quite sure how to react to some of these. Do you have an opinion?
It depends on the actual study. Sometimes they are indeed breakthroughs in understanding the mechanism, but they are still in the cellular level, like looking at a cell model or looking at an animal model. And that still takes a long time before something that is discovered that works in animals to tried in humans to be tested to make sure that it's safe to be given to humans. So you have to read those headlines and then actually go into the details of the study to find out what exactly is the study. So I agree, because media usually like to highlight the main findings, and then you just read the headlines. It sounds very exciting, but you do have to actually read the study to understand what is the discovery. It doesn't mean that they are not important, but they're still maybe at a more preliminary level and needs further investigations.
Well, I think you've just put that all into perspective for us. Do you believe we've made progress?
I think so. In the past year, a lot of headlines have to deal with the newer therapy. And I have to say that I have been disappointed in the last 10 years. There's really no new treatments available. But in the last year or two, there are some findings that suggest if you treat people really very early, there could be benefit. And there are two things that are exciting. One is the biomarkers. So these are tests that we can confirm the presence of a disease. And without that, we're only using memory tests, which is only partially correct. But a memory test has so many other variables that are hard to interpret sometimes. So if we have an actual measure, like a blood test or a brain scan that can diagnose the disease and follow the disease, then we can actually predict what is going to be helpful much better. And there are lots of advances in these biomarkers for Alzheimer's and other type of dementia. And the other thing is that there are some preliminary studies suggesting that these chemicals or molecules can actually slow down the disease in the very early stage. So those are exciting news, but of course we need larger scale studies to make sure that it's safe to be given to humans.
So Dr. Sheng, do you actually have a personal connection to the disease that's inspired you to focus your attention on dementia research?
Well, interestingly, no and yes. So the no is that when I got into neurology is really just for personal interest. I was still young and energetic, and I was fascinated by how the brain works, how humans make decisions. So I thought studying the brain and brain diseases is exciting. But after I've been in the field, unfortunately, my father has Alzheimer's, and I have to deal with that in the last 8 to 10 years, and he finally passed away last year. And I have a very personal connection to dealing with the disease. And being in the genetics field, I also understand my own risk, so there is a very strong personal connection to it now.
Very interesting. Now, I understand that our guests, Pat and Roger Howard, were part of some of the clinical studies out at UBC. Is that correct, Pat?
Not clinical studies,
okay.
But it was a research group. Very interesting because it was a program designed by people with the diagnosis, and we were the first group that they were going through that. They were testing the program and getting feedback from us on what works and what doesn't.
Okay. Since we're talking about the families, about certain families on this journey of dementia, can you talk a little bit more about the prevalence of dementia in families? Are there any statistics or any more depth to that conversation?
Yes. The family risk is quite complex because there are some disease-causing genes, and then there are disease risk factors genes. Disease-causing gene is if you actually have that gene and you carry the gene, if you live long enough, then you will get the disease. But those disease-causing genes are very rare and probably affect less than 5%, probably somewhere between 1 to 5% of the people have disease-causing genes. The rest of us, 90 to 95% of us, probably just have a risk factors. And the risk factors increases the risk compared to the general population without the risk, but it doesn't mean that you will always get the disease. So combining the disease-causing and disease risk factor, when you have a first-degree relative, your risk is about 3 times higher than the general population, and when you have multiple first-degree relatives, then your risk is 9 to 10 times higher than the general population. And if one of your first-degree relatives has been confirmed to have a disease-causing gene, then you're at 50% risk of carrying the gene. So it's not so simple.
And Dr. Sheng, I understand that you've been involved with some work around musical therapy. How does that fit into your research program?
So that is another way just to study what can benefit patients. So it was designed as a clinical trial, and it was actually started by the music therapist in our hospital, Dr. Kirkland. He came up to me and said that we've been doing music therapy to the patients, but when we do literature review, there are actually very little evidence to show that it works and benefits patients. And together we designed a clinical trial and was fortunate to have support from Alzheimer's Society and the Canadian Institute of Health and Research. So we have funding to carry out this clinical trial in the last few years. And we found that music therapy actually does have evidence of benefiting Alzheimer's patients, mostly in improving behavioral symptoms and reducing stress.
Absolutely. Dr. Shung, that's great information there. I know firsthand how effective music therapy was when my mother had Alzheimer's. She always responded with a smile, even when she wasn't even able to communicate. I'm also fascinated to learn that Pat and Roger are huge advocates of incorporating music into your journey as well. Very important. And Dorothy, you also raised that point, how that's one of those things that never changed with a diagnosis. You can still hear and you can still appreciate the beauty of music if you've enjoyed it your whole life. That's great. Dr. Shung, is there anything, a final message you would like to leave with us today? About your research or about your ultimate goals or your hopes for the future?
The hope is that before I retire, there will be a treatment so that in case I need it, I can receive my own treatment. But the important thing is to do research to understand the disease, and not just our researchers doing the research. The main thing is to have people participating in the research, like Pat is helping us to discover a better understanding of how to treat patients.
And Maria, any final words as we wrap up today's show with some wonderful guests, and we've learned so much about the research and support services and a journey with a family?
I think it's so important to have this conversation and keep talking about why it is so essential to support families who are on this journey, why dementia-friendly communities is a way to support all of us in many ways as we come together and want to participate and leave our own legacies. And the research component is, essential, as Dr. Shung is sharing. And as I said earlier in the show, when there's some exciting news, but there's nothing significant, it's even more important to support research and to support the people who are looking for that cause and a cure. It's so necessary. But I, again, want to thank, Roger and Pat, because they are leaders. And the Investors Group Walk for Alzheimer's is about honoring people like the Howard family who are on a journey but are asking other people to step up and help and work together to make this something that we can all support each other in.
Thanks, Maria. Maria Howard, CEO of the Alzheimer's Society of BC. Big thanks to Dr. Robin Shung for joining us from UBC today. Also, thanks to Dorothy Leclerc for your insight on the services provided at the resource centers with the First Link coordinating program. Also, big thanks to Roger and Pat for sharing your story. It's a very personal story. We look forward to seeing you at the Investors Group Walk for Alzheimer's, Burnaby Lake, and that's on May 1st. I'm interested to hear the music you're going to provide that day as well. Thank you for sharing this journey with Boomer Life and the Alzheimer's Society of BC. I'm Joanne Sutton on CL 650.
Celebrating the baby boomer lifestyle. This is Boomer Life on CL 650.